The difference between a brand new relationship and one that you've been in for 2+ years, going on however many years. I briefly just talked about 3 differences in my last video that happen in a new relationship that don't necessarily happen in an old relationship. And now I'm just gonna go into them a little bit further. The first thing that I talked about is that it's easier to initiate sex with your partner in a brand new relationship. The reason this is true is because in a new relationship, your brain is flooded with hormones. Who knows when is the last time that you've actually had sex with a partner that you feel really, really good about and really close to. So basically what ends up happening is all of the hormones that are happening in your brain, like oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine and all of those crazy chemicals are going wild, which makes it much easier to want to have sex with your partner, and it makes it easier for your partner to say yes to having sex. So, initiation is not difficult because you're not necessarily going to get as many no's as you might in a long-term relationship. In a long-term relationship, you've probably had plenty of fights at this point, plenty of tough conversations. Maybe there are some topics that you can't necessarily be yourself about, or you can't be vulnerable all the time. And sex becomes really contextual. So it becomes harder to initiate because the likelihood of rejection is actually a little bit higher. Second thing, easier to ignore the icks. I know this is a really big thing that a lot of people are talking about these days. Icks are basically the things that turn us off from somebody. In a brand new relationship with somebody, I'm not talking about somebody that you might be interested in, but the beginning of a relationship with somebody who you feel connected to and you know that they feel connected to you, you're going to ignore those things that might bother you long term. So I don't know, if they fart and it stinks up the room, right? In a new relationship, you're gonna be like, this is gross, but I'm not gonna not wanna be with this person. I'll still sit next to them and maybe I'll ignore that they just did this. But in a long-term relationship, you're not going to ignore it. You're gonna smell it and you're gonna say, ew, get away from me. Now I need to move to the other side of the couch because that's gross and I don't wanna smell it. So there are things in long-term relationships that we don't ignore in the same way that we ignore in the beginning of a relationship. The last thing that we're going to talk about is that it's harder to be your true self in the beginning of a relationship than it is in a long-term relationship. Because in the beginning of a relationship, you're still trying to impress that person. As much as you feel like you can be yourself around them, it hasn't been long enough for you to actually show them you in your good days, your bad days, when you're clean, when you're messy, when you go through bouts of depression or anxiety. You're really only showing them the best version of yourself for the most part. And in a long-term relationship, you can't escape the bad stuff because you're with them all the time. And so it's much, much easier to be yourself and to be your authentic self. And that's when in a long-term relationship, you really feel tested, and that's when the real work begins.